speakers, Dr. Anthony Sinkel, and then Dr. Siesterling, and Ibu Antonia Rahayu Rosaria Wibowo. So with your time, so I will allow Deputy Director General of SKAO, Dr. Simon Berry, to open the talk, please.
Good morning. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Good. Thank you very much. And well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Antonia, and the organizers for the invitation to attend this webinar and speak to you at the opening of the session. It's quite early from here in the UK, so please bear with me as I'm waking myself up as I'm speaking a little bit. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity. So I think the invitation was really nice to receive for Ant and myself from SKAO. The agenda for today is interesting, and as you have said, the speakers that we have here will address a range of very important topics around the sustainability and inclusivity approaches that astronomical facilities and research infrastructures need to have and are having, and the techniques and new agenda that is emerging for the way that we work in doing astronomy and building major infrastructures and facilities in places where there are indigenous communities, where we must work in a respectful way. And that's important as we see the development of astronomical facilities that are bigger and bigger and more complex because of the challenges that they're trying to address. And that's really approaching, taking us to a new era of the scale of facilities that we use, and the complexity that comes from being able to work inclusively, respectfully, and compassionately with the indigenous communities where facilities are located. So I'll speak a little bit here about the SKAO, the SK Observatory, but in a little while, Ant will tell you a lot more about what we're doing. But let me say a few words to introduce SKAO for those who may not be very familiar. So as you said, I'm the Deputy Director General, and we're an intergovernmental organization which has 13 member states. Soon it will be 14 when France completes its membership. And those member states are working together to construct 2 radio telescopes, which will together be the largest and most powerful radio observatory in the world. And so I'm speaking to you from the UK, where the headquarters of the organization is, just outside Manchester. But the telescopes themselves are being constructed in the Northern Cape region in South Africa, and in Western Australia, as you'll be hearing in a lot more detail from Ant in a moment. So the mission of the observatory and the mission of the international organization is clear. In fact, it's built in fairly clear words into the convention that our member states have all signed. And it's to build and operate cutting-edge radio telescopes, an infrastructure which will transform our understanding of the universe. But it's also much more than that. It's required, and its mission is to deliver benefits to society through global collaboration. We have a unique global membership that spans 5 continents, and to ensure that the infrastructure develops and creates innovative outcomes, whether that's through technologies, whether that's through different approaches to science, open science, and so on, but also things like jobs to provide inspiration for the next generation of scientists and engineers, increase the skills base for scientists and engineers in our member locations, and especially in the host countries, and to develop industrial capacity. They're all consequences of doing something the scale and of the complexity of the SKA. But it's also, I think, a special example of research infrastructure organization. As I say, the mission has been established very clearly within the convention. The membership of the observatory is growing still further as other countries are beginning to join. And I think in connection with the theme of this webinar and in keeping with that mission statement, the mandate of the observatory is something which extends beyond that groundbreaking research and those other outcomes that I spoke about to encompassing responsible practices that promote sustainability, social equity, well-being around the membership and around the communities and the locations where we work, and education. And these are all themes which are very closely aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. That's something that we're trying to measure ourselves against so that we can track the way in which we work and the outcomes that we have against measurable parameters. And there's a direct impact on people, and especially young people, in Carnarvon in South Africa near the SK Mid Telescope. For example, the observatory and the local radio astronomy actors in South Africa are jointly investing in childhood development centres. There's professional and academic development that comes from the observatory. For example, in the organisation or co-organisation of a radio astronomy school in Geraldton, Australia, aimed at PhD students, which will be training the next generation of radio astronomers. Perhaps Ant will be saying something about that. But more generally, around the observatory's social license to operate, as we call it, there are contractual conditions in place in the construction activities, for example, the infrastructure installation, and more generally in building the telescope. There's a requirement for the local community and the indigenous communities in where the observatory is being constructed to be involved directly. And that's something that's important, enabling the uplift of the local economy around the telescope sites, direct industrial outcomes, and the direct economic benefit within the observatory's activities. Internationally, and I think later speakers will talk about this, sustainability also includes the way in which we work to ensure the protection of the night sky environment, or the protection of the skies, which we are of course studying. We'll hear, I'm sure, later about the threats that there are to the near space environment from a range of threats from low Earth orbiting satellite constellations, from light pollution, which can impact optical and radio astronomy facilities. We have a special position with our international visibility and our international legal status that allows us to be in a place where we can help to tackle some of the issues that come from that. That's itself a very important element of ensuring not only that we're able to take actions to protect the ability to do astronomy from the ground in optical and radio wavelengths for the professional community, but also more generally because of the impact it has more generally on society, and especially the indigenous communities who've been undertaking astronomy in a variety of forms for thousands and thousands of years, much longer than the time of the recent science of astronomy. So there's a space in which we operate there. But I think, and this is really to the theme of this webinar, particularly for the SK Observatory, in our host countries in South Africa and Australia, where the telescopes are being built in particular, we've been determined to move to a position where what we do and the activities we're undertaking add positively to those communities and inclusively to those communities. I think it's fair to say that in many places and over many years, there's been a history of science infrastructures, like many other types of infrastructures and industrial activity, to operate without a clear and effective partnership being in place, more of a tenant landlord relationship, for example. And certainly in the world of science infrastructures, that paradigm is shifting now. It's changing, and we're working very hard to make sure that we're playing our part in that evolution. And when we speak about a social license to operate, that means creating a genuine partnership with the communities where we're located and in which we work. So you'll hear a lot more about that specifically for the SKA case, and more generally from the other speakers in the talks to come. But I think across all the speakers today and with the webinar and the agenda that we have, we've got a unique opportunity to look at this new paradigm, this new way of working for astronomical facilities, and their role and their obligation and the increasing success that there is in working inclusively with Indigenous peoples where those astronomy facilities are located. And I think we're going to have a really fruitful discussion in this webinar to come. So that's my opening set of remarks, Chair, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak and open this webinar and provide some introductory context. And I'm looking forward to a fruitful and successful discussion from now on. Thank you.
Dr. Hera, you are still muted.
Yeah.
Sorry. So
yeah.
next we would like to to allow Dr. Heri Yogaswara, head of the Research Organization for Archaeology, Language, and Literature from National Research Center. Please, Pak Yogaswara, it's your time.
Okay, thank you for Dr. Hera for your kind of introduction, and also for Dr. Simon Berry, Deputy Director General of SKAO, and also for Busastri as Head of Research Center for Manuscript Literature and Local Tradition, and also for the three speakers, I think Dr. Anthony Sinko, Dr. Sea Esterling, and also Ms. Antonia Rahayu Rosaria. Actually, I also have difficult to say good morning, good evening, or but good day for all. Yeah, and then first of all, I would like to say thank you for organizing this very important webinar entitled of the Rendezvous of Astronomical Facilities and Indigenous Communities. My name is Heri Yogaswara, Head of Research Organization, Archaeology, Language, and Literature. I would like to introduce about my organization first, BRIN, National Research and Innovation Agency, as integrated for all research institute in Indonesia. We have 12 research organizations. 2 of them are, I think, related with this discussion. The first is Research Organization, Aeronautic and Space, and also Research Organization, Archaeology, Language, and Literature. In our research organization, as by name, we are focusing on archaeology, language, literature, and also the religion heritage. That I think that's why today we have discussion, webinar to see the intersection between the astronomic things and also the social science and humanities. Actually, in Indonesia, relationship between astronomy and social science and humanities is already very solidified. Why? Because as a Muslim country, every year the government should declare about the first day of breakfast month and also for the Idul Fitri. They use the meaningful of astronomy for sure. And then secondly, I think if we talk about the indigenous people, yeah, actually I really focus my research about the indigenous communities. We know so many local communities, indigenous communities in Indonesia, they have what's so-called local knowledge related with the astronomical things that related with the agriculture and also for their daily life. And also, as a BRIN, actually we have research collaboration with the one of organization, I think in Thailand. We use the term of archaeoastronomy and also ethnoastronomy to understand about the relationship between the Candi Borobudur, the Borobudur temple and other temples in Central Java, how our ancestor was using the astronomical things to put the temples in the proper place based on their philosophy, and also I believe because they also calculate related with the safety the area built to be a temples. And then this morning we discussed about the title about the astronomic facilities and indigenous people. I think that's very, very important for us in Indonesia because we have the millions of indigenous people in Indonesia, and of course some of indigenous communities located close or surrounding the area of astronomic facilities. Yeah, maybe Antonia will talk later on more detail about the Timau. But I think why this discussion is very important because I think for management of research facilities, since the planning side, they should also involve indigenous communities in the what we call the planning, the building planning. Since very beginning, they should talk with the indigenous community because first of all, they can use parcel of land that maybe belong to the ancestral land of the indigenous community, and also they should talk about the consequences if the astronomical facilities built in that area. Of course, we would like to have the positive benefit than negative benefit of the facilities. And as we know, indigenous communities is they are a knowledge holder about everything in their area. They know about the type of soil. They know about the kind of what I would like to say about the season, even about the climate. That the knowledge from the indigenous communities should be accommodated in the planning and also the implementing of the astronomical facilities. And also the facilities should give the good impact for community, creating livelihood, creating economy, and also they should creating the new knowledge about the something related with the astronomic thing. in our point of view related with the Timau in Timor, later on Ayu will talk about it. Actually, we would like to have the astronomic facilities as a hub for the exchange of knowledge among the scholars in the Timor area, and also because the area is in the border area of East Timor, we would like to also have the interstate cooperation related with the astronomy and other science things. That's, I think, our hope if we talk about the astronomic facilities, yeah, include in Indonesia. And related with this collaboration, I do hope this is not stopped only in webinar, but webinar just started our collaboration because I think in BRIN, we have several schemes and facilities to invite scholars to work together, maybe related with the postdoctoral, professor and visiting researcher to join with these activities. Yeah, I do hope through this this webinar we can really work together with the several partner, including SKO and others partner in this room, because I think in my point of view, this theme is quite rare. Yeah, talk about the astronomic thing and talk about the indigenous community. But I believe, yeah, because I think when I read the speakers, that people who are really working in that issues, and of course we would like to learn a lot with this webinar. Again, thank you for this collaboration, and also thank you for coming, attend this webinar. And I hope this webinar fruitful, and also we can continue with our collaboration. That's all for my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Heri Jogaswara. Your very encouraging statements and opening remarks. And then we all agree about the need of the more collaboration in this relatively new issue. So now we are coming to the next section. The first speaker, the presentation would be about the coexistence between the SKAO, Low Radio Telescope Project, and the Wajari people. So the presentation would by Dr. Anthony Sinkel. And Dr. Anthony Sinkel is the SKA Low Site Construction Director with responsibility for overseeing the construction of the SKA Low Telescope on Inyarimanha Ilgari Bundara. Sorry if I mispronounced the word. So it's CSIRO's, oh, it's so difficult to Murchison Radio Astronomy Observatory, or MRO. So it's time for you, sir, to give your presentation. You have like 15 minutes here, like, oh no, around 20 minutes. All right. So Dr. Sinkel, time is yours.
Great. Thank you. Can you see my first slide okay there?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So look, firstly, thank you very much for this invitation to talk today. As was noted, this is an increasingly important topic with all major research facilities, but particularly astronomy ones for reasons I'll get to in a minute. And by the way, you did an excellent job of pronouncing those names. They are quite challenging. So I'm primarily going to talk, of course, about the SKA and the Indigenous group in Australia, where we are building the facility, the Wajari people. But there is a much bigger engagement here as well, and there are lessons that we can learn from many different telescopes around the world. Some of you probably know of some of the issues in Hawaii, on Mount Mauna Kea, on the island of Hawaii. and of course, significant developments in Chile as well. And I think an ongoing communication like this would be very valuable long term. Firstly, I would like to recognise and acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which our facilities are being constructed at the moment, and pay our respects to their elders past and present. We acknowledge the Wajiri Yamaji as traditional owners and native title holders of Inyarimana Ilgari Bundara, the CSIRO Murchison Radio Astronomy Observatory, where we are building the SK Low telescope. I also pay my respects to all First Nations people in attendance. So I'm going to touch on very briefly now the SKA, because Simon's given you a good background there. Why is astronomy moving its facilities to such remote locations? And then move into some of the very particular Australian context, native title, the Indigenous land use agreement, the benefits that might flow. I think the broader United Nations context is an interesting one, and then finish up with some comments about issues. So again, just noting that what Simon said, that the SKA is an intergovernmental organisation created quite recently, currently about 14 members and continuing to expand, and many new countries coming soon. Excuse my computer popping things up. In South Africa, we are building the MID telescope, just for completeness, so a little bit of the story of that. It's being built on the lands of the Sand people in the Karoo Desert, and will be a dish-type telescope, something that many of you will be familiar with from movies and possibly even visiting. The telescope here in Australia is a little bit different. It's going to be composed of an enormous number, 131,000 individual antennas, about 2 meters high each, as you can see from these images. And this is a very different type of telescope, a low frequency one, that covers quite a substantial area, about 75 kilometers by 75 kilometers. This land that we're on here is currently leased from our partner organisation here in Australia, CSIRO, which is the federal government's primary science research organisation. Some of you may be well aware of them. Quick note here about the science, of course, just so that you sort of understand that this is a purely astronomy-driven telescope. The SKA, both telescopes will be doing very different types of astronomy, but nonetheless, here are some of the big topics. I'm not going to get into them, of course, but there are many different drivers for these new large telescopes, as Simon's already noted. So why are we moving to these very remote locations? And I think most of you are familiar that in a city, just at night, you look up at the sky and you don't see as many stars or our own Milky Way or the galaxies, anything like as well as when you move to the country. And the reason for this, of course, is the light pollution. So many optical telescopes have for decades been in very remote locations. But increasingly, this is true for radio frequencies as well. And so here in Australia, for example, here is a spectrum from about 100 megahertz down there on the left-hand side of each plot to about 1,000 megahertz or gigahertz. It's a logarithmic plot. So in fact, that very noisy signal you're seeing from Sydney covers many orders of magnitude of range. So doing astronomy in there is impossible with all the background radio frequency noise. Where we are up here in Western Australia on Bellardi Station, the MRO, you can see that the noise is much, much lower. And those few spikes that are there, mainly from aviation and satellites, and they're endemic around the world these days. So both kinds of astronomy really are suffering from man-made interference quite badly. We're our own worst enemies, basically, with our phones, our cars, our fridges, welders. Everything with electricity running it basically can produce noise. So we have to make sure we move away from industrial centres, basically anywhere with people as far as possible, so that we're not suffering from any of that noise. This location here in Western Australia in the Murchison Shire, that map in the middle there shows our local government unit, the Shire of Murchison, about 41,000 square kilometres. Just for a comparison for some people, there are no gazetted towns in this 41,000 square kilometres, and the population, if everyone's at home, is up to about 120 people. For comparison, there is the Netherlands, similar size, Massachusetts in the United States. The population of the Netherlands on about the same area is about 16.5 million. So you can really get a sense of how remote and unpopulated this region is. This is then zoomed in on the actual Inyarimana Ilgari Bundara, the Murchison Radio Astronomy Observatory, and it is a very odd shape just because of historic reasons about how these lands were divided. It's a very large piece of land. It's 445,000 hectares, or about 1.1 million acres. The red lines on this map are the unsealed, they're dirt roads, public roads that run through the region with very low traffic. In this map, there is only one community of people living right over on the left-hand edge there. There's a small square at about 75 kilometres away called Murchison Settlement, and there's about 10 people living there, maybe 15. The black circles there are the locations of each of those black circles is about 1 hectare in area and is about 1,500 antennas. So that's the background for why we are moving increasingly to remote locations, be it here, be it Chile, South Africa, and of course, as many of you may know, in Antarctica as well. One of the things that happened in Australia back in 1992, after a very turbulent 3 decades, was that the Australian government recognised the concept of native title. And this was an extremely major change in Australia. And this was the understanding that the continent was not terra nullius, or land belonging to nobody, when European settlement first started here in the 1770s. There were, in fact, people here, the Aboriginal people, and this principle of terra nullius was incorrect. So this very important High Court case in 1992 recognised the Indigenous people's native title to the land and the waters in the country. It recognises their connection to the land and to the waters, and recognises that they can have a say in ongoing activities on the land. This principle of native title recognition does not apply to freehold land, only to Crown land. That's about, it's a very large section of the country. It's about 32% of the entire continent. And I think one of the very important things I want to note here, because it will come up later, is that in fact Aboriginal Australians have been here for at least 40,000 years. There is speculation at the moment from recent archaeological work that that could be approaching more like 60,000 years, which are timeframes that I think many of us struggle to conceive of. This native title determination process is quite complex. Basically, a claimant, a native Indigenous person from a region, presents a case to the Federal Court of Australia, making the case that their family has continuous links to this land and they can demonstrate that, and that they wish for recognition as having the native title. It is a very long process. It can be 3 to 5 years, would be quite quick. It can be 10 or 15 years. So frankly, one of the flaws at the moment in this process in Australia, well-meaning as it is that it can take a very long time. It's a very important step towards then a proponent, such as the Australian government and the SKA, going ahead to build a facility on the land. First, there must be a native title determination as to which Indigenous group is the correct group for the land. And then you can progress to something called an adalah. And I'll get to that in a minute, an Indigenous Land Use Agreement. The image in the bottom right there, I'd just like to note, this was a very major ceremony here in Australia, where the High Court of Australia actually relocates to a relevant piece of land where the native title claimants are from. In this case, quite close to the observatory site here, about 40 kilometres southwest, on a neighbouring pastoral property called Willeen Station. And through a very formal process, this High Court announces the determination of native title, and bestows it back upon the relevant Wodjiri claimants in this case. And this occurred in 2017 here. Just a quick background here. These areas in Australia, the different coloured areas here and these different shapes show the very large number of significant, depending on what wording you want to use, perhaps clans or tribal groups across the country. And you can see there are many hundreds of them, in fact. The area we are on over here in Western Australia is in the far left there, the northwest, this region of Wodjiri lands. When this determination occurred, you can see on the top right there the individual sections and the family maps on this land. It took place in October 2017, as I said. There are a number of very major ceremonies around that. And then this process allowed for the commencement of a process called the adalah. So once the native title is determined, that gives the native title holders significant rights over their land, of course, as one would expect. So a proponent who wishes to use that land for something must reach an agreement with the native title holders about what they want to use it for, what the impacts of their project on the land will be, and provide some positive benefits to the native title groups in exchange for being allowed to use their land. So there was just harking back in 2012, the original SKA bid, we did in fact do a very early adalah for a small piece of land here for one of the development telescopes called ASCAP and NWA. That first one did produce, as I said, a small adalah, but then once SKA was agreed in 2012 to be split between Australia and South Africa, we had to develop a new adalah for a much larger piece of land, this 445,000 hectares that I referred to. This took a long time to negotiate, from 2016 to 2022, and the negotiation is between the Australian government, which is the proponent on the behalf of the SKA effectively, and the Wodjiri people themselves. I should note that, of course, that period of time did include COVID, which did significantly slow down the negotiation process. I think 3 to 5 years is a bit more common for these, but COVID definitely impacted that process quite heavily. One of the things about our adalah that is new and different compared to most other adalahs in Australia is that there is a requirement for a very significant cultural heritage management plan. Previous adalahs required what I'll call, frankly, a relatively lightweight approach to what happened to material that was discovered on the land that had cultural or heritage significance to the Indigenous group. But as a result of an incident in the very north of the state in 2019, where a mining group destroyed a very significant set of art works in caves at an Indigenous site, the legislation changed very greatly, and it requires us to put forward a very rigorous cultural heritage management plan that's agreed to by the native title holders, the Wodjiri people. This can include something which we call Section 18s, and these are very clearly delineated regions of land that we must not disturb. And we have to demonstrate how we are going to protect them. And then there is a process that I'll refer to in a minute during construction, where the Indigenous people are engaged and paid to make sure we're not disturbing any of those. So it's a very, I think it's proved a very successful process, this new cultural heritage management plan process at Section 18s. This project, SKA, is one of the first to do this in Australia, and so it's been under some scrutiny from many other proponents looking at adalahs over the next few years. So each of the 27 areas that were classified at the highest level of significance, which is what a Section 18 is, is then very carefully recorded. It takes about 2 days for each site, and this includes then an inspection process, recording of that, submission of the documents, and then the relevant native title group gets to decide for a given heritage area, do they want to leave the materials in place? Do they want to salvage them and put them somewhere for safekeeping? And that could range from anywhere from a museum, if they were felt that they were suitable for public display, to a private place if they were artifacts of a more personal or family or ceremonial nature. And that process is really quite a big one. Another outcome associated with the Allure, there are many benefits and requirements on the proponents, ourselves in this case, to fund activities in the long term that will benefit the Wurundjeri people. So, for example, we fund Aboriginal liaison officers to assist in the communication between the proponent, the SKA, and the Wurundjeri groups, to assist in communication, to assist in employment opportunities and things like that where we're offering them. There's also a business development officer that we fund, and that position then helps small Wurundjeri companies learn how to grow, learn how to bid on tender jobs, interface with the SKA. We also fund a lot of other activities, education at all levels that I'll talk to in a minute, artworks as well, and there are significant requirements on the SKA for commercial opportunities. This includes providing contracts back to small Wurundjeri-owned companies, as well as more direct employment, which I'll also get to in a minute. A kind of a lateral one, but nonetheless one that's very important to some members of the community, is that we provide the opportunity for the Wurundjeri to name parts of the telescope, infrastructure, antennas, all sorts of different things, so that they have some naming authority there, and gives the feeling of recognition further of their native title on the land. I should note very strongly here that, again, CSIRO, as Australia's science organisation, they have the primary lease on this land from the WA government, and we are a sub-licence holder from them. And CSIRO and us, SKA, work very closely in this area of making sure we deliver all of these responsibilities and benefits back to the community. I really cannot overestimate how important in this kind of structure in Australia the relationship between the federal government, the primary research institute, in this case CSIRO, and the SKA is in terms of how these allures operate to make sure that everything produces the right kind of benefit back to the native title holders, the Wurundjeri people. This is what I noted before about naming. So we advertised a fairly major naming ceremony for around all of the Wurundjeri people to come up with names for various aspects of the telescope. Again, it helps with the engagement, as well as I think giving them a significant feeling of ownership and recognition. So one of the things I mentioned was the Section 18s. So this land has been occupied for, as I said, many tens of thousands of years. And although to many of us, when you look at such arid land where the rainfall is only about 230 millimetres a year, it would be very inhospitable to live here. But in fact, the Wurundjeri people have lived here for enormous periods of time, and they have many instances of their heritage on the land itself. And so before we start building the telescope, we initially perform a walkover of the land with the Wurundjeri people, typically about 10 to a dozen, with professional archaeologists and ethnologists. And literally any area of the land that we're planning to develop must be walked. And the people walk in about a 5 to 10 metre gap between individuals, scouring the entire landscape for any artefacts. As you can imagine, this takes quite a long time. And it took about 3.5 years during when we were designing the telescope for them to then walk the entire 600 hectares that we're planning to disturb, because it's spread out over a very big area. This generates then a very accurate map of artifacts on the site, and the Wajri make the decision about what happens to that. In many cases, they'll say, these are minor artifacts, for example, potentially shards from tool-making area that's actually already been disturbed by a river. They might be somewhat more significant artifacts. On the left there, you can see grinding stones where grain has been used, where grain has been ground for preparation of food. In the middle, you can see a small compass next to, these are discarded spearheads. So, and in the top right, you can see very significant artworks. So depending on the significance of the artwork, the Wajri tell us what we must do: move away from the area entirely, move around it and fence it, etc. In exchange for this permission to go onto their land and make sure that we do not disturb their significant sites, we also provide a number of other benefits. And this includes everything from financial benefits in a trust fund that the Wajri themselves administer. It includes infrastructure improvements for a neighbouring Paya community for the Wajri people. This is on the very edge of the observatory site called Paya Wajri, and there's money committed here to improve their infrastructure, power and water in particular. It includes employment opportunities, both directly from the SKA Observatory, but also from our major contractors and subcontractors building the telescope. We're also obligated, and quite rightly, to provide contracting opportunities to small Wajri companies and help them grow. There's a wide range of different educational outcomes as well, and these range from bringing school kids, Wajri school children to the site, as you can see in that bottom right-hand image, to in the top image there, we have Wajri trainees that we bring in to assemble the antennas. We support university scholarships, although at the moment we haven't yet got that far. We've got a long way to go, I think, before we get to that level. And the middle, that photo there on the left, is one of the art programs we've supported with a number of Wajri artists. Another important part of the benefits is that all science articles that are published that use data from this telescope site must reference the Wajri people as the native title holders of the land, and we are running the telescope on with their permission. Just a very specific snapshot here. During a 3-year period or 2.5-year period, we employed 5 different Wajri small and medium companies on the project here, plus another 3 by SKA itself. That might not sound like many, but that's 8 companies out of a total of only 17 Wajri small and medium companies. So we had a very good penetration there. We've averaged 23 Wajri staff and 21 other Indigenous Australian staff in direct employment here on site. Plus the heritage monitors who, as I mentioned earlier, engaged in walking over the lands to make sure we're not damaging them. A very important additional benefit was a joint venture between one of our commercial groups and the Wajri in operating our 176-bed camp community where all the staff out here live while they're building the facility. We have 8 Wajri technicians currently on staff. We employ them relatively unskilled, and we put them through a training program, and then they can stay with us or they can go on to other opportunities. I think a lateral benefit that is not well recognized, but is, I think, a very key one, is that we also, everyone who comes here to work on the site must go through a 1-day induction, which is basically a Wajri cultural and heritage training process. And so far, we've put 1,400 people through this process. And that, I think many of them would tell you how affecting this was on them. This is a full-day training where it talks about Indigenous Australia, how the colonisation of the country impacted the Indigenous groups, how they are trying to respond to it now, and what changes we're making. It's a very impacting training. One other benefit is that, of course, in the background, people can bear in mind that we have a 50-year operational life of the telescope. So there are other very solid long-term opportunities for engagement there. All of this takes place within the United Nations Sustainability Goals. So I think some of you may know there's about 17 sustainability goals. We have isolated 10 that we have a very strong view that will be impacting, and I'll provide this talk back to people with a bit more interest in this. So there's 10 key ones that they're going to be impacting. This includes improving infrastructure for the Wodjri at their community on the edge of the observatory site, education, employment and growth opportunities, rehabilitation of the land I haven't mentioned, but that's a very key one. We're only disturbing 600 hectares of this 445,000 hectare site, but making sure that overall we work with CSIRO to minimize any damage to the site and to make sure it's rehabilitated is a very key aspect of us. And of course, in a more generalized sustainability sense, we're also planning to install a very large solar array here so that we can have the maximum possible renewable energy rather than using diesel. Finally, I'd like to just touch on some issues and conclusion. So I think in general, and I think many of the Wodjri would very much support this, we've gone through a long process that's been very successful. The negotiation of the Ulua, as I said, was about 5 to 6 years. And I think one of the key things that we've both learnt from that is that communications is very important and understanding each other's cultural approach. The Wodjri cultural approach to how you would undergo a negotiation is very different to how a government or a science organization does that. And I think getting a much clearer handle from all these different groups on how to go about negotiating a Ulua, not just for science groups, but for all groups, would make that a much easier process on all people. I think a theme throughout the any of the problems in the process has been this one of communication. We use words differently, and I think understanding that was something that only arrived to both groups a couple of years into the process, and it was a very important one. As I note here, the native title determination process, which is unfortunately a very, it's a high court process, and so there's not much that we can do about it at this point, but it's very long. It's, as I mentioned, it can be many years, and that can be very complicating. The conclusions from my perspective, and I think the Wodjri would support me here from my conversations with some of their elders recently, is that the recognition of native title in 1992 was a big step forward. It was, of course, many years too late, but at least it has happened now. The process for native title determination and the Iluas that we execute then to seek permission for using a piece of land is extremely well-intentioned, but there are some definite hiccups in the process. The timescale's too long. The communications are problematic. The expectations around projects can be very difficult. So we have to be, we on the science side, in this instance, of course, have to be very good at explaining what the point of a particular project is. Again, you know, we tend to talk about our subject rather passionately and at too high a level. So making sure we can talk about the benefits of the astronomy we're doing, for example, is a very important part of this. And just noting I've gone over time, I'll be very happy to participate in the questions and answer at the end of this.
Thank you, Dr. Sinkel. It's very impressive descriptions and explanations about the project. I don't know how should I proceed? Should we proceed to the second speaker before the questions?
Yeah, but
All right,
maybe you can read the translation first that I prepared. The translation of the abstract from Anthony. I think I have sent it to you. Yeah, in Bahasa, Kak.
Yeah.
For the audience who don't speak English. Thank you so much.
Okay, all right. So I was asked to try to translate Dr. Sinkel abstract and talk, which is like I would like just to like what actually like the abstract what he talk about rather than talking about the abstract karena agak berbeda sedikit. Jadi presentasi Dr. Sinkel ini sangat menceritakan sebenarnya ada beberapa tahap proses dari SKOA ini yang sebenarnya area kerjanya meliputi Afrika dan Australia dan beliau fokus pada masyarakat Wajari. Nah, di presentasi ini beliau merangkum ya ada beberapa proses sebelum menindaklanjuti proyek ini. Yang pertama yang paling penting menurut Dr. Sinkel adalah entitlement dulu, pengakuan tanah dulu. Sebenarnya pengakuan tanah dulu, kemudian pengakuan tanah ini adalah bagian dari prinsip project yang bersifat sustainability dan kemudian juga harus berdasarkan pada transparansi. Jadi karena ada entitlement inilah yang memakan waktu yang banyak karena harus dihargai dulu tanahnya, kemudian baru bisa dilanjutkan proyek selanjutnya. Dan yang kedua adalah proses recognition, yaitu native title negotiation tadi itu. Jadi sebelum ada pelibatan masyarakat indigenous people terhadap proyek ini, mereka harus memenuhi beberapa macam prosedur yang tadi itu mereka harus punya entitlement ya tentang kepemilikan tanah mereka. Kemudian mereka setelah sudah melampaui semua proses-proses yang dilalui, mereka akan dilibatkan dalam proses project ini yang tadi banyak sekali proses yang dilibatkan adalah proses training, kemudian proses sharing project, kemudian manfaatnya. Dan yang ketiga adalah yang persoalan prosedur yang ditekankan oleh Dr. Sinkel sangat menarik sekali adalah harus berdasarkan engagement, partnership, dan prinsipnya adalah prinsip komunikasi. Dan ini sangat tidak mudah karena di situ biasanya terjadi miskomunikasi. Jadi mereka masih dalam proses selalu melibatkan komunikasi dari dua pihak, bagaimana keuntungan terhadap mereka. Kemudian dan ini bukan tanpa tantangan karena adanya proses mungkin ya pengertian tentang apa sebenarnya benefit dari proyek ini bagi mereka, dan ini adalah sebuah proses yang panjang. Nah, saya pikir itu saja yang saya bisa simpulkan mungkin yang dari apa yang beliau sampaikan, sangat menarik sekali. Sudah cukup Ibu Ayu ya?
Ya Kak, you can proceed.
Great.
Thank you.
So thank you Dr. Sinkel, it's very impressive. So all right, so we would like to move to the second speaker, Dr. Sea Esterling. She will talk about the indigenous people's right in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So, wait a minute, I need to see your Dr. Sea Esterling. She's a senior lecturer above the bar in the Faculty of Law at the University of Canterbury, New Zealand. So her research is at the intersection of indigenous rights, dark skies, and heritage law. So Dr. Esterling, time is yours.
Thank you. Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Waitiene, he pukena matua aho ki te whare wanana o Waitaha, ko Sea Esterling tōku ingoa. Thank you very much. Greetings from here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I have no idea what time it is anywhere else, but it's afternoon here. It's a very reasonable time, which I can tell you never happens when I'm giving a presentation here in New Zealand. I'm usually in the middle of the night, so you have my sympathies, those of you in the middle of the night or very early morning. I just like to start, or I started by saying who I am, and that I'm based here in Otutahi, Christchurch, Aotearoa, New Zealand, at the University of Canterbury. I live, work, and play on the lands of the Ngāi Tahu, and like the previous speaker also as well, I'd like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples on whose land I live and work, and people that I research with quite closely. So with that said, just go here and get started. So I'm currently doing a research project entitled Protecting Our Dark Skies, Indigenous Knowledges in the Law, which has been generously funded by the BRIN Foundation here in New Zealand. And the aim of this project is to draw attention to light pollution from artificial light at night, or ALAN, both from the near-Earth environment and our terrestrial environment, but in particular to look at cultural, social, and economic impacts. I think many times it's focusing on ecological impacts, human health, things like this, but kind of increasingly we're starting to see research looking at the cultural, social, and economic impacts of light pollution. And in taking this lens and looking at the cultural, social, and economic impacts, my goal is to develop model legislation here for the governance of light pollution to protect dark skies in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that incorporates Matauranga Māori, or Māori knowledge, the Indigenous peoples here in New Zealand, the Māori. And hopefully to have that legislation serve as model legislation for other countries. So what I thought I would do in my efforts to be organized, how to go about this presentation, telling you about my project and its link in with dark skies, science, and Indigenous peoples and Indigenous rights, is to perhaps use this as a framework to run through the research project itself, running through from point 1 to, I guess we're around 7-ish at the moment. We're not quite at 8-ish, writing up the report yet, in the sites that I have visited so far. So that's how I'd like to proceed. So initially here, I was working on a project with other lawyers, law academics, and astronomers here in New Zealand. That started about 6 years ago when some astronomers contacted me and said, "Hey, we'd like to know about some heritage in outer space." And my mind was blown. I was like, "What? Heritage law in outer space? What is this?" And that's how I kind of got involved in thinking even about astronomy, thinking about dark skies in terms of my own areas of research, which are cultural heritage and Indigenous rights law. And as part of that collaborative research project, the two kind of main conclusions that we could draw from that is one, that ALAN is increasing, and that there's a lack of international and domestic law here in New Zealand to regulate ALAN, even though it is an increasing problem. So here in New Zealand, to give you some idea of where we're at the moment, in 2023 there was a petition to Parliament to introduce legislation to protect against light pollution, so to do something about ALAN and the problem that we have. And the Petitions Committee forwarded it onto the government, making 3 recommendations, and in particular a recommendation saying that the government should investigate how to deal with light pollution, to deal with ALAN, and to reduce light pollution. About 6 months later, in March 2025, almost a year ago, the government responded, in effect saying that due to other priorities, working on RMA reforms here, the RMA is our environmental legislation, that due to their work on focusing on kind of overhauling the RMA, that they didn't consider this at the moment. Perhaps it could be part of the considerations in relation to overhauling our environmental laws. So it was pretty much a flat no, but that's not particularly surprising with our current Luxembourg government here in New Zealand. I think that kind of tracks with what we're seeing. So what is ALAN? Just a little bit on the research context here. So this was all new for me. You have to bear with me as I'm not I'm not a scientist. So yeah, for me, the definition that I'm using for my project is ALAN is indiscriminate light as a product of human activity, and that human activity comes in either two forms. So on my quite an elegant graphic here on the slide, either from our terrestrial environment and unmitigated kind of urban lighting, or in the near Earth environment through satellites and increasingly these kind of mega satellite constellations. And to the extent that ALAN kind of surpasses or is in excess, we can view that then as light pollution. Now, in the initial project, we kind of looked at the sources of light pollution both terrestrially and then in the near Earth environment. And the project that I'm working on now will consider both, but for the past 6-7 months since this project has gotten started and gotten going, I principally have been looking at ALAN in the near Earth environment, but obviously both are a problem. So for me, again, in terms of near Earth environment, using definitions from my science colleagues, thinking about space beginning at 100 kms up, which is much closer than I ever would have thought. My brain just doesn't work kind of in those terms. And space, in terms of how I'm thinking about it, is both a tangible and an intangible. So it's an intangible in that it is, it's a tangible and very much in the sense that it's a place where we can place objects, very much tangible objects like satellites. It's something that we can perceive through our senses, through sight and sound, but it's intangible in the sense that it's a place where activities occur. And for me, this is quite interesting because thinking, and particularly as a heritage lawyer and a heritage person, we can think about heritage in terms of both tangible and intangible. So seeing that in space and kind of this near Earth environment for me was really, really quite interesting. So just how bad is artificial light at night and this light pollution that we have? Well, taking here some stats from the New World Atlas of Artificial Night Sky Brightness. Sky brightness, it shows that more than 80% of the world and more than 99% of US and European populations live under light polluted skies. And I think when initially kind of starting this research project, the thought was, okay, well that's the northern hemisphere. That's not us down here. Look at us down here in New Zealand. I mean, we're even lucky we made it on the map. Trust me, I've seen UN documents where we don't even make it onto the map. So I'm just extraordinarily excited we're even here. So that's quite exciting. But you look at it relative and you think, oh, well, it can't be that bad. New Zealand really prides itself on being dark skies friendly, astrotourism, etc. So it must not be that bad, right? So, it is. In effect, it is. We do have numerous areas designated as international dark sky places here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. 53% of our motu, or our islands, fall within some of the darkest skies on the planet. Based on land area, 74% there of North Island and 93% of South Island, where I'm based. I live here. I'm down there on South Island and Christchurch. 93% of it has night skies that are either pristine or degraded only near the horizon. So relatively speaking, we're doing okay. But the reality is because of the intense urbanization of our population on these motu, only 3% of our peoples regularly actually experience dark skies. But you wouldn't know that based on advertising here in New Zealand and tourism campaigns. As I say, very much there's a push that we're a dark sky friendly country, astrotourism. You can even see here the Bank of New New Zealand, helping the people in New Zealand always find a way, you know, this real idea that we're a dark sky country. But in fact, here in New Zealand, 56% of the New Zealand population can no longer actually see the Milky Way in winter. And in wintertime here, we now celebrate the Māori holiday of Matariki. So that clusters of stars, and it's quite key for Matariki to be able to see those stars. But increasingly, as I said, our population can't see that. As I said, 56% of the population can't see the Milky Way in winter. The average rate of increase in spatial area of light emissions in New Zealand was 4.2% between 2012 and 2021, which is actually above the global average rate. And the thing that's quite striking in the initial research that we did is there's not even kind of an awareness or a perception that this is a problem. And I mean in the sense that both awareness about the issue to begin with, but actually more interestingly for me there's not even kind of the perception of the sense that it is a problem. It's often actually perceived as something beautiful. So you can think of photographs of skylines, famous skylines at night, and paintings, and it's viewed as actually art or something quite beautiful, not as the pollutant which it actually is. It's not perceived in the same way as toxic, chemical pollution, things like this. It's actually perceived as something that's quite beautiful. So really kind of limited awareness about it. And we know quite clearly from research, we have loads of research out there that suggests that clearly it has impacts on environmental and human health. We know that there are increased incidents of breast cancer due to lack of dark skies. We know increased species predation, loss of biodiversity. So we're very kind of aware of these ecological human health sort of impacts that come from light pollution. And kind of despite this problem, ALAN and its light pollution is set to increase. So this is a screenshot that I took probably about 8-ish months ago now. I usually try to update quite sooner, but you can see I've tried to give here like a little outline of where Aotearoa, New Zealand, where we're at, and you can kind of see all the objects that we have out there. And taking my stats from the Space Law Council of Australia and New Zealand, their estimate is that of May 2020, there are about 2,200 satellites in orbit, and that they estimate somewhere between 60 and 100,000 satellites in orbit by the end of this decade. Nonetheless, whether those numbers are spot on or not, the trajectory is upwards. So everything says the trajectory is headed upwards in there in terms of what we'll have in space. I'm turning now kind of to my project and kind of what I've been doing and the background research in terms of the law side of things that I've been working on. Is that generally speaking in international law, there's no mention of dark skies, and there's little mention of environmental protections for dark skies. So there is a soft law piece of documentation, the La Palma Declaration as it's known. I've got a picture there of the cover of the declaration there on the slide, which does explicitly talk about the night skies. So in defense of the night sky and the right to starlight, obviously, of course, that does talk about dark skies and the need to protect dark skies, but it's a soft law obligation. It doesn't create those binding hard law and enforceable obligations. When we think about hard law in relation to protecting dark skies, kind of the initial thought process was, well, let's look here at some space law. And so space law here, we have a lot of hard law treaties here. And none of these talk about really any environmental protections, and there's no mention of dark skies kind of whatsoever. The closest we get is Article 7. The OST does make state parties liable for damage caused by their objects or its component parts, but most pieces of space debris are so small that it isn't actually attributable under the OST to one state, and that's particularly true in this era of new space or space 4.0, where we have an increasing variety of actors. It's no longer, we can't think of space as any longer just state and state actors, that traditional kind of Cold War framework of involvement. We have lots of actors sending up things all the time. And the result here is because it's not attributable, what that means is that damage to the space environment is basically externalized onto all of humanity, offering no real protection for dark skies. It's kind of that idea of the tragedy of the commons. We're all responsible, but no one's responsible, is kind of the situation that we have at the moment in terms of legal frameworks. So the idea with the project was well, let's try to look beyond and think beyond just space law. Are there other particular areas of law which could possibly be relevant to protecting our dark skies? And so if we kind of take an anthropocentric lens, so kind of like a human-centered or human-focused sort of view. The ones that spring to mind for me were heritage protections, human rights protections, and specifically protections for Indigenous peoples. All of those have possibilities to anchor onto and to provide protection via human beings for dark skies and the importance of dark skies to people via human rights, Indigenous rights, or as heritage. So they do provide a possibility. There are, however, issues with that. So I think one of the most fascinating issues, particularly in relation to heritage law, is the transient nature of the night sky. So it's always on the move, right? And to have jurisdiction under heritage law and to be able to protect heritage law is very clear that the state looking to protect that heritage needs to have jurisdiction over that heritage site. And so the transient nature of the night sky doesn't make that possible, at least in that traditional sort of way of thinking about how heritage law works. And then beyond that, we have implementation and enforcement issues, which kind of international law is always kind of beset with these sorts of problems around implementation and enforcement. Beyond that, looking kind of at the domestic situation, again, kind of through an anthropocentric sort of view here, maybe domestic New Zealand heritage laws, looking at environmental laws, i.e. protecting the environment because we live in the environment, we live here in New Zealand, and looking at some of those local council regulations. Here, again, kind of run into the same sort of problems. We did kind of find in that initial project, one of our research assistants, a thankless task, went through all the local council regulations on light pollution in New Zealand and said, do any of our local councils have regulations around light pollution? And councils do. It's not consistent, but as you would imagine, those areas within New Zealand that are certified as international dark sky places, of course, have quite strict local council regulations, but there's nothing kind of coherent and sustained across the country in relation to that. Heritage laws, jurisdictional problems, and the same in relation to environmental laws, again, jurisdiction problems. As I was speaking about briefly earlier, the RMA, our Resource Management Act, which is currently being overhauled. We're not sure what's happening with it, but as of this moment, when I'm speaking, the RMA only applies to aircraft operating below 500 feet. So again, it wouldn't apply to that near-Earth environment and to those issues there. So again, continuing to have jurisdictional issues. In terms of outer space law in New Zealand, so New Zealand is party to the OST, to the Outer Space Treaty, and we have actually been for many years, but we only actually implemented or put into effect our obligations under the OST in 2017 through OSHA, the Outer Space and High Altitude Activities Act. And that was basically precipitated by kind of Peter Beck and Rocket Lab and launching of things like Humanity Star and the fact that New Zealand is increasingly kind of a launch state. And so in 2017, New Zealand was like, well, we should probably get our act together and actually implement the OST. And they have done now through OSHA, and it's administered through MB, the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. And, you know, it looks to regulate these sorts of activities and supply licenses and permits. Now, again, there are also issues with this. So OSHA makes no reference to dark skies. There's very limited reference to the environment. We can see that in Regulation 13, which is the orbital debris mitigation requirements there. And these are in the process. I was just looking this up to double check a couple of days ago to see kind of where we're at. They've not been amended yet. They're in the process of looking to amend the debris mitigation plans. But my understanding is at the moment is that the plan is more about making sure that when you are set to launch that you include a plan, but the plan could perhaps be that there is no plan, but you've included at least that your plan is no plan. It's not concerned with kind of active debris removal. But as I've said, I've read recently that the government is looking to amend that. I think that's been pointed out, that it's not necessarily up to snuff or up to standard in terms of thinking about mitigation in relation to debris. Again, nonetheless, domestic and international law, you can really see here kind of there's a hodgepodge of kind of laws we could kind of weave or thread together. There's nothing consistent or sustained for the protection of dark skies. And here in New Zealand in particular, you know, when we think about law, one of the core functions of law is the balancing of conflicting interests and rights. That is one of the core functions of what law does. And I think New Zealand it's quite interesting because I think it speaks to perhaps other jurisdictions in that on the scales here being balanced, you don't even have kind of dark skies or concern with dark skies in the environment, even on the scale. OSHA and our laws here in New Zealand are looking to balance basically space regulation, thinking around things like safety, and then on the other side of that, balancing that with things like industry growth and commercial development. And I think that's very clear by the fact that our Ministry of Space and OSHA is administered by MB for, you know, the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Enterprise. It's quite clear that it's industry, commercial growth, development on one side, and then balanced on the other side with safety. So nothing really here explicitly about environmental protections or dark skies. In the project that I'm doing, what am I actually doing? You know, looking at these cultural, social, and economic kinds of impacts and looking through those lenses at dark skies. How am I actually going about doing that? So, in effect, I'm visiting all of the places that were designated as international dark sky places by the organization Dark Sky International in Australia and in New Zealand. So, kind of pin those on the map here for you to see. My funding was received towards the end of 2024, so the sites that I'm visiting are those sites as of the end of 2024. But as you can see, for instance, in looking at Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have a number of aspiring places. We actually have had a couple further ones, Naseby, for instance, down on South Island coming on. And I know Australia, I believe, has had another one or two crop up since the end of 2024. So my plan is to visit all of these sites. So instead of a visual, just a listing here of those places I'll be visiting or have already visited. What will I actually be doing? So I'll actually be interviewing at these sites people who were involved in the certification process of getting the area accredited with Dark Sky International as an IDSP or an international dark sky place. Also looking to speak with other stakeholders such as those that are on the board or previous members of the boards of IDSPs. And then members of the local community who have some sort of link in with the fact that where they live is an international dark sky place, be that through tourism, policy people, so local councils, Aboriginal land councils, iwis here in New Zealand, enthusiastic and not so enthusiastic residents. You get a full variety. And then probably my favorite to interview are citizen astronomers and scientists who are a great deal of fun and always very enthusiastic. And that's been a real joy to work with that community as my research has gone into this area. So those are the people that I've been interviewing and the sites that I've been going to. Now, in terms of the interviews themselves are semi-structured sort of interviews. So while there are questions that I do ask and that I have prepped up in advance, it's very much a dialogue and a discussion, and kind of see where it takes us, which is quite interesting. And also in these interviews, taking very much an intersectional approach. So very much making sure here that the voices of women, and in particular Indigenous women, who often face double discrimination by virtue of the fact that they are both women and they are Indigenous, making sure that the voices of women, and in particular Indigenous women, are included amongst those that I interview at every site that I'm going to. And Indigenous women are also frequently the knowledge holders in their communities in relation to dark skies, is at least what I've been finding so far. Here's just some sample questions of the types of things that I'm asking during these semi-structured interviews. Of interest to us, which I'll talk about, is the question at the bottom: what role do you think Indigenous knowledge plays or should play in the application and maintaining of International Dark Sky Place certification? But also, more broad questions just about trying to get to grips with, how did they get certification? What was that process like? Do you actually know how to maintain that sort of certification? How's it affected kind of your everyday life, tourism impacts, economic impacts, and things like that. So moving in here towards the end, actually processing and analyzing the data. So I have conducted a few site visits in Australia in 2025. I haven't started any in 2026 yet this year, but hopefully those will kick off in May sometime. I'm returning back to Australia for a few more visits and then to do my New Zealand site visits. But I just thought what might be interesting to conclude with here is an analysis I've done of some of the Australian sites that I've visited. So as I said, I did some semi-structured interviews. Those interviews there with those various stakeholders that I was just talking about. And the thematic analysis here, I felt interesting perhaps for this presentation for the audience, would be looking at local Indigenous peoples' impact and influence in the dark sky area, and the impacts of dark sky designation on the population, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous as well. Initial research results. So still kind of filtering through these. So some broad conclusions, results up there at the top. So interestingly, the process of IDSP certification, that has been widely perceived by my interviewees as quite a complicated process that you have to go through with Dark Sky International, especially for those without a technical or kind of astronomy background. A lot of the big drivers sometimes of dark sky sites are not by any means technical people, scientists, astronomers. It will be driven at kind of at the community sort of level. So definitely mention that it's been a complicated process to kind of figure out going through that. I think following on from that, it's not surprising that next result there is that they've said that the certification, the paperwork that's required by Dark Sky International and the Dark Sky International website was also found to be not very user-friendly for the general public. That's also the feedback that I've received as well. But nonetheless, once you get certification is a great source of community pride. And this is amongst both Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. One thing for me that was particularly interesting here is that in talking with Indigenous peoples about this as a source of pride, it was really interesting to hear people explain that they've always had kind of pride in the land, in the area, and in the dark sky, area. A very holistic view of heritage. They're not actually really much of a divide between the land and the sky, but that they've always had this kind of sense of pride in their area, and that they actually see certification as kind of almost like a retroactive recognition by other people, going, yeah, now you see what we've always seen. Now you understand, the land and the sky for our people as well. So it was kind of verification of something they already knew by someone from the outside. And most interestingly, so far, there's not been any involvement of actual Indigenous peoples in the certification of the areas as international dark sky places. And for me, that was absolutely fascinating, because thinking in terms of Indigenous rights, and as an Indigenous rights, human rights lawyer, that's clearly violations of UNDRIP, that UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which talks about Indigenous peoples having self-determination, free, prior, and informed consent in relation to any decisions that affect them, in particular in relation to their lands, including here lands, the dark skies as well. So I thought that was quite interesting. Now, one thing that I can speak to in relation to that is now there seems to be almost like a retrofitting. Now that these places have dark sky certification, Indigenous peoples are now involved. They're being invited to sit on the dark sky committees. They're involved with the tourism that's come to the area, but it's kind of like a retrofitting, like perhaps we should now include you. That's kind of how it's been described to me. In terms of quite specific results that are probably of interest to this audience when we're talking about economic, social, and cultural sides of things and looking through those lenses, no doubt economic benefits. So certification has made sites a destination for astrotourism. There's no doubt about that. And all community members, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, have really stressed the importance of that, and stressed that the importance of those economic benefits, that they should flow back into the community. One thing that's really interesting here is that, however, is not necessarily the case that it's flowing back to the Indigenous community. So there have been incidents of where, for instance, Indigenous storytelling and Indigenous knowledge is perhaps used in tourism, but they're not seeing the economic benefits of that flowing back to them. They haven't been involved in that. There's also been Indigenous peoples providing translation and stories and knowledge and sharing, and then not necessarily having recognition that they've done these translations or they've shared these stories and shared these things. So again, quite interesting. In terms of cultural benefits, certification creates opportunities for Indigenous peoples to reconnect with their culture and to retain traditional knowledges and customs. So the flip side of that, I think we can clearly say from what I'm seeing is that light pollution is a threat to Indigenous knowledges. Without access to dark skies, into the stars, it threatens further alienation from culture, traditional knowledges, and customs. Also, certification has created opportunity, which I think is really interesting. Both Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples talked about this, for them to interact with one another in quite a positive way. Positive experiences were shared by both, and in a way that allows Indigenous peoples to set the limits on what they want to share and how much they want to be involved. And I think one of the takeaways from that is that dark skies and the preservation of dark skies preserves and strengthens cultural diversity and harmony here. Just concluding with some recommendations based on kind of those initial studies that I've done there is I think, we need to look at mandating authentic Indigenous involvement in the process of international dark sky place certification. I was really interested in Ant's initial presentation, and I think these presentations really fit together quite well, that there is all of that involvement there, and that there has been that involvement from the beginning. And I think that's what I would like to see here in relation to international dark sky places and the certification process, is that sort of an involvement, and that sort of involvement from the beginning, not a retrofitting like perhaps we should have done this, before, and that could be guided by UNDRIP and UNDRIP provisions. We have guidance there already for us of how to do that, best practice. And that, interestingly, and I think this one really for me, I hadn't considered this before at all, and I wanted to conclude with this one, is that I've really come to think here that dark skies really present an opportunity to kind of counteract some of the ills of the impacts of colonization. So we all know that colonization alienated Indigenous peoples from their language, their culture, their customs, their stories, and things like that. But dark skies actually present a way to revitalize those language, cultures, and customs. And I would conclude here with a story that a young Indigenous person told me in my interviews, and that was he didn't, as a result of colonization, he didn't grow up knowing his language and knowing the stories, particularly the stories around the dark skies of his people, and was kind of alienated from those things as a result of colonization. Now with dark skies and dark sky certification in the area where he lives, he's actually been learning his language and learning his traditional stories in relation to dark skies. And it's allowed him, he said in his own words, to reconnect, rediscover his own culture. And I think that speaks, I can't say any, but I think that speaks volumes right there to the power and the potential impact that dark skies have, not only to protect human health and ecological health, but in terms of sustainable development goals as well, supporting those goals that we perhaps don't think of in relation to dark skies, like i.e. education, i.e. redressing inequalities here, addressing the ills of colonialism. Hopefully, if we ever get a sustainable development goal around culture, supporting culture as well, supporting harmony and communities getting along, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and diversity. So I think there's a lot of potential here with dark skies. And I would thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and to thank you all very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Esterling. This is very impressive. So about dark sky remind me about the Bible verse, I'm black but beautiful. So it's quite like a paradox, like to keep like black but also like benefit from the dark sky. So Mbak Ayu, saya harus simpulkan juga sedikit.
Cek, if you don't mind, Dr. Hera.
Oke,
Thank you so much.
Sekali. Ya, sangat menarik sekali presentasi Dr. Esterling ini tentang proteksi dark sky. Jadi beliau mengungkapkan bahwa untuk sebelum masuk pada penyelamatan dark sky, beliau harus memberikan pengertian dulu, pendefinisian tentang ruang, karena tidak mudah untuk mendefinisikan bagaimana kita menghukumi ruang. Jadi harus didefinisikan dulu ruang. Ruang itu apa? Jadi beliau mendefinisikan ada dua ruang, intangible ruang dan tangible ruang. Ruang yang bisa disense, ya, dan ruang yang tidak bisa disense. Nah, ruang yang tidak bisa disense ini bagaimana hukum bisa diterapkan terhadap ruang yang tidak bisa kita lihat, dalam artian dark sky, karena kan langit nggak ada batasnya. Nah, beliau menerapkan bahwa intangible space definition ini yang sangat penting sekali, karena di situ ada pengertian bahwa intangible space adalah apapun semua aktivitas yang melibatkan space itu yang tidak bisa dilihat, tetapi yang bisa dilihat adalah impact-nya. Nah, karena adanya light pollution, ada polusi ini terhadap dark sky, jadinya orang Maori atau indigenous people sudah tidak bisa lagi melihat secara clear berbintangan atau segala macam langit yang tadinya gelap itu indah. Di situ ada keuntungan ada keuntungan secara kesehatan, kemudian dari ritual juga ada kepentingan indigenous people juga di situ, untuk bisa melihat dark sky ini tetap jernih dan tetap gelap gitu dengan secara natural. Nah, ada paradoks di sini tadi yang Dr. C. Esterling sebutkan, bahwa karena light pollution tadi ini menciptakan semacam cahaya-cahaya kecil yang ternyata bagi sebagian orang itu dianggap itu indah, padahal ini sebenarnya merupakan efek dari polusi yang bisa berakibat fatal, mengakibatkan kanker, dan orang juga sudah tidak bisa lagi melihat langit itu dengan secara langsung. Milky Way tadi ya, Milky Way itu rasi bintang mungkin ya,
Galaksi Bima Sakti.
Galaksi Bima
Bima
Sakti,
Sakti.
galaksi Bima Sakti. Padahal bagi mereka itu melihat secara langsung itu sangat memberikan efek yang bagus terhadap kesehatan. Nah, inilah yang beliau sedang perjuangkan, bagaimana segala aktivitas yang bisa memberikan polusi terhadap dark sky itu yang harus harus diukur dulu, sejauh mana impact dari aktivitas itu bisa menghalangi dari kejernihan pandangan orang-orang indigenous tadi sini terhadap tadi untuk melihat galaksi Bima Sakti secara langsung. Dan ini merupakan hal yang tidak mudah karena mendefinisikan space tadi itu, dan segala proyek yang dilakukan oleh pemerintah berkaitan dengan sustainability sama sekali tidak menyebutkan adanya dark sky ini. Jadi mereka membuat planning, tetapi planningnya itu tidak melibatkan planning tadi itu dark sky tadi, orang-orang indigenous yang harus memang dijaga kebersihan dan kejernihan langitnya dari segala aktivitas yang bisa mengakibatkan polusi. Jadi menarik sekali bagaimana beliau bukan seorang saintis tetapi melihat bagaimana efek dari proyek-proyek yang saintik tadi itu terhadap dark skies tadi. Saya pikir saya hanya bisa menyimpulkan seperti itu. Semoga bisa betul-betul merangkum apa yang disampaikan oleh Dr. C. Esterling tadi. Ini sangat-sangat kompleks sekali sebenarnya permasalahannya. Baiklah, we move now to the third speaker, Ibu Antonia Rahayu Rosaria Wibowo. She's going to talk about a Timau National Observatory Indonesia. Timau mungkin itu ada di Nusa Tenggara, right?
Yap, Nusa Tenggara
Yes,
Timur. Timor Island. Yep.
Timor Island. So mana tadi CV-nya? Wait, saya kehilangan CV Anda.
Oh,
Alright. So saya kehilangan CV Anda.
should I resend it?
No, okay. Saya kehilangan CV Anda tadi.
Di WA.
Ya, ini ada. Alright. Ibu Antonia. Ya, right. No, I'm sorry. Oh, Ayu, sorry. Ya, it's not Antonia. Agak mirip namanya Anton. Alright, so Antonia Rahayu Rosaria Wibowo, she's a researcher at the Research Center for Manuscript Literature and Oral Tradition, Research Organization for Archaeology, Language and Literature, at the National Research and Innovation Agency, BRIN. She will talk about this threat of satellite constellations to developing countries such as Indonesia, which is quite broader, but like she want to talk in particular about this constellation in Timau area. So Ibu Antonia, time is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen? Clear, okay. So first of all, I would like to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are. And thank you so much for joining us here in Indonesia, and also special appreciation for Dr. Hera for being the moderator in a short notice. Also, thanks to Dr. Simon and also Anthony and Shea for joining us here. In particular, Dr. Simon, because it is a brutal time for you. It's 2 a.m. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Okay, before I continue the presentation, I must declare that this presentation has been presented before in December last year in the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs at the Dark and Quiet Skies workshop for science and society. So for Shea, please pretend that you haven't heard this presentation before, because now I add some things for the Indonesian participants. I add the context. Okay, so The title here is the threat of satellite constellations to developing countries such as Indonesia. So here I focus on the developing countries, which is my country, Indonesia. Before I move further, I have to explain that Timau Observatory has been initiated in 2015, and until now, it is still under construction. Actually, before this observatory, Indonesia has older observatory, which is Bosca in Bandung. Observatorium Bosca or Bosca Observatory, it is located in Bandung. But after 100 years, the light pollution around Bandung area has increased. That is why our government decided to build another national observatory for the sake of astronomy science, also for the sake of the development of the people, especially in the eastern part of Indonesia. And then after some scientific research conducted by Institut Teknologi Bandung and also LAPAN or National Institute of Aeronautic and Space in the past, before the BRIN era, Timau was decided as the place to build the observatory. So the process began in 2015. And then at the time, the related stakeholders signed the MOU. And then the master plan to build the observatory was agreed in 2016. And then in 2017, the contract to create the telescope with Japan was initiated. The contract was for 4 years, and then it started in 2017 and until 2020. Besides developing the observatory and the telescope, the local government also developed the road, because in the past there was no asphalt road, it was just soil. So it's quite difficult to transport the telescope from the capital city of East Nusa Tenggara, which is Kupang, to the location of Mount Timau. And then in 2021, there was a integration for all research institutions in Indonesia into BRIN, or National Research and Innovation Agency. That is why the mandate to develop this new observatory now is under BRIN. So it is not under LAPAN anymore, because the LAPAN, National Institute of Aeronautic and Space, has integrated into BRIN with other research organizations or research institutes in Indonesia. And then in 2022, the dome installation was started, and then the building for telescope was still continued. Also in 2022, the bridge was renovated as well. And this bridge is important because this bridge connects Timau and the capital city of East Nusa Tenggara province, which is Kupang. And by using this bridge, the transportation time from Timau to Kupang will be less. That is why this bridge is also important. And then in 2023 and 2024, the telescope installation was still continued with the help from the Japanese institution, which is Kyoto University. And then in 2025, all mirrors had been installed in the new telescope. In total, there are 20 mirrors. And then this year, the current progress is our Japanese part still working on the finishing of the camera, and then it is targeted that all camera is installed this year, and then the observatory can fully operational. That's about Timau Observatory development timelines for the introduction. And then main concern of this research is the threats of satellite constellations. So as I mentioned before, Timor Observatory is still in the preparatory stage. It's not yet completed and it's not yet fully operational, but satellite tracking has potential to significantly reduce the quality of data obtained from this new facility. It becomes a problem. So poor data quality is a major problem for Indonesia because of its limited budget for building large and modern astronomical facilities. Besides disturbing the astronomy science, the satellite strike also disturb indigenous communities around Timor Observatory because actually the communities living around this observatory have their local astronomical knowledge. And the existence of the satellite constellation has the potential to block the indigenous community's sky observation. It also violates their rights as indigenous people, especially like what is mentioned in United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, Article 13.1. So this picture was taken from all sky camera from Timor National Observatory on 20 September 2025. So these lines show the satellite strikes that disturb the observation process. So this is the stars, but we cannot see the stars clearly because of these satellite strikes. That is why it disturbs the quality of the data taken from the camera in Timor National Observatory. And also, due to these satellite strikes, the indigenous people cannot see the stars clearly. Okay, because this observatory is not fully operational yet, I did benchmarking study with the other countries. So this is best practices from other countries. I took two examples here from the Bawaka country and the Kaiba Paiute Indian reservations. First case, which is the Bawaka country. The people living in this area believe that they have relationship and ties between indigenous people of Bawaka country and their ancestors and kin whose souls migrate to Sky country. Also, they believe that the interactions are also altered by interaction with outer space through the launching and development of satellite constellations. This demonstrates how the likelihood of satellite constellations significantly influence not only indigenous traditions based on astronomical information or the transfer of indigenous knowledge and heritage, but also indigenous people's spiritual rituals and relationships to their ancestors. So this research says that the development of mega constellation satellite above the sky conducted by developed countries also disturb their relationship with the sky, especially because they believe that their souls go to the sky after they pass away. So it disturbs their rituals and ties with their ancestors. The similar case also happened with the indigenous people live around Timor Observatory because the Amfuang people live near Timor Observatory believe on Wisneno or God of the Sky atau Tuhan Langit and Wispa or God of the Earth. This is the research result from Dr. Sastri and Professor Thomas Jamaluddin that found that the traditional Ampuang people or the indigenous people around who live near the observatory believe in God of the sky and God of the earth. That's why they have their own belief related to the sky, similar to what the Bawaka country believe. And then the second best practices I took from Kaiba Paiute Indian Reservation that encompasses 5 tribal villages alongside the non-indigenous community of Mokassin. And then The designation of Thunder Mountain Pot-Shift Night Sky formally acknowledges the Kaiba Paiute status as a sovereign nation, underscores the cultural significance of Thunder Mountain and the night sky to their people, and recognizes their unique Southern Paiute language. In the case of this Kaiba Paiute Indian Reservation, the designation of Dark Sky Nation has strengthened their status and their local language as a unique language. And then around Timor Observatory, there is an urgent need to document and transmit the knowledge of the sky to the younger generation before it is permanently lost where the elders pass away. The experience of the Kaiba Paiute offers a valuable model for such cultural preservation. Another example from the Kaiba Paiute Indian Reservation is at the Pipe Spring National Monument. Knowledge transmission is facilitated through a variety of public programs, including ranger-guided hikes during the full moon, star party, workshops on planting native gardens using traditional methods, educational talks on light pollution, and other outreach activities coordinated with the national park. However, due to the existence of satellite constellations, sky-related knowledge transmission is almost impossible around Timor Observatory because the elders cannot show the celestial objects to the youngers with their naked eyes. Okay, this picture is the traditional house of the Ampoang people who live around the observatory. In the local language, we call it Umebubu. The design of this traditional house or Umebubu is closed. This house does not have ventilation. So even if the people cook inside this house or if they lit a fire inside, there will be no light visible from the outside of this round house. In addition, free roaming livestock are still allowed. So animals can go around this house because there is no potential for light pollution. This condition shows that local culture or the traditional house of the people is in line with the conditions of minimal artificial light because the light is blocked by the construction of this house, which is round. And the minimal artificial light is a major requirement for observing the sky with the naked eye, the clear sky. In addition, the shape of these houses does not disturb the habitat of endemic animals around the observatory. However, this house still cannot block the strike from the satellite constellation that disturb the ability to observe the sky with the naked eye. So what I want to say here is the local tradition or the local house in this context is actually in line with the situation needed to observe the sky using the naked eye. However, the development of the current technologies disturb this tradition. So the local people will bear the consequences of the mega satellite constellation. Okay. Considering that situations, I recommend some recommendations here. These recommendations can be divided into two parts at the national level and at the international level. At the national level, it is recommended that all stakeholders, including the central government, represented by the research institution responsible for the observatory, like policymakers, local governments, and indigenous communities, collaborate to preserve the astronomy-related knowledge through conducting interdisciplinary research to support the policy formulation to preserve areas around the Timor Observatory as a dark sky park. Second, developing teaching and outreach materials from the interdisciplinary research result. It is also important because the problem or the disturbance of mega satellite constellation cannot be overcome only by the astronomer. It also needs the involvement of the local people, of the indigenous people, because the indigenous people also bear the consequences if the satellites constellations is to become too much in our sky. It leads me to the third recommendation, which is involving indigenous people in every activity from the research and then drafting teaching materials and policy document to include indigenous people as co-authors in scientific publication. And then recommendation at the international level, based on Indonesia's experience in developing the observatory on a tight budget, yet threatened by the existence of mega satellite constellations before the observatory is fully operational, it is important to create an international agreement regulating developed countries and private companies actively deploy satellites in orbit to provide compensation to developing countries that are scientifically disadvantaged. Okay, so I think that's all for my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and we can continue later on with the discussion. Back to you, Dr. Hera. Thank you. You are still muted, Dr. Hera.
All right, should I conclude, because you already conclude, you have a conclusion already with recommendation. All right,
Maybe you can.
So
yeah, thank you.
all
You can
right,
read
so
the translation if
yeah,
you don't mind. I have provided everything there
yeah,
under
exactly.
my
So
biography. Yeah.
Exactly. So jadi sebenarnya mungkin sama persis apa namanya antara yang dibicarakan oleh Dr. C. Esterling tentang tadi penyelamatan dark sky apa namanya dengan kasus yang di Timau, karena memang dark sky itu adalah sebenarnya bagian dari bukan hanya sekedar ritual, cuman mungkin yang lebih mendasar lagi adalah dark sky itu sudah bagian dari cara hidup orang indigenous. Kemudian bagian juga dari agama, yang bagian dari mungkin keyakinan atau agama ya, karena agama kan sentral di semua indigenous, kehidupan indigenous itu agama itu bukan hanya persoalan ritual saja, tapi cara hidup, caranya dia melihat realitas, termasuk tadi bahkan yang dicontohkan oleh apa namanya tradisi di indigenous tadi piet Native American piet tadi itu ya, jadi bahwa mereka ketika melihat langit ya mereka Tuhan mereka sudah di situ, jadi mereka sudah mempersepsi bahwa konstelasi langit itulah disitulah apa namanya nama-nama Tuhan mereka di situ, mereka percaya, mereka perceive sebagai aktivitas yang ilahi di situ di konstelasi langit. Jadi karena kebersihan langit atau kejernihan dark sky ini diperlukan oleh orang indigenous orang indigenous, karena merupakan sebenarnya bagian dari agama mereka. Nah, inilah yang sebenarnya hilang. Dr. Shia Sterling tadi menekankan itu, bahwa karena adanya proses tadi kolonialisme inilah yang sebenarnya menghilangkan atau memblurkan, mereka mengaburkan, bahkan they eliminate, right? Dr. Sterling mentioned the colonialism, one of the impact, the negative impact of the colonization is they try to eliminate this function or how the beneficial of the dark sky for the indigenous people. And then now how you want to plan, bagaimana mereka membuat planning, tetapi planningnya itu tidak sama sekali melibatkan bagaimana sebenarnya apa benefitnya dark sky ini pada indigenous people. Nah, itu yang di-eliminate. Jadi sebenarnya untuk merancang ulang planning tadi, apa namanya, harus tadi itu mengembalikan dulu apa sebenarnya fungsi dark sky people ini kepada masyarakat indigenous. Nah, saya pikir itu saja yang saya bisa simpulkan, karena sebenarnya pandangan kita sama. Nah, because like we finished with all the 3 presentations, should we go now to the QA section? QA sections now. Okay. So for those who want to raise questions, please just unmute yourself. We have now here first questions from Ibu Sastri. So okay. So but Ibu Sastri question is very general. I think like I also have the same question with Ibu Sastri. So Ibu Sastri asking about the very challenge. So the questions from Ibu Sastri is for like 3 of you, but especially for like Dr. Sterling and Dr. Wait, forget his name again. Dr. Sastri and Dr. I don't want to miss the first speaker. Dr. Sinkel about the very challenge. So Dr. Sinkel, for Dr. Sinkel, could you please answer that questions? Like, what is the very challenge about this apply this project? What so called this SKAA low site construction project, or like a telescope project? Like, what's the very challenge? Because you already mentioned also, because there is no how do you say, there is no actually like agreement yet between the one who actually applied this project and the indigenous people. You mentioned that you're still like bridging that perspectives, what actually the project could benefit from the indigenous people. And then also to Dr. Kenapa kok saya lupa tadi namanya, second speaker, Dr.
Yeah.
Sterling. So what's the very challenge that you face? Because like if I read your questions, you raise several questions here. Actually, like one of your questions is also very important here. But how would you like, how's the project can really like how do you say determine the very knowledge of the indigenous people, like how the indigenous people knowledge in terms of dark sky, and then the clear of the dark sky, to be able to see the dark sky with the naked eyes is very important in their knowledge. And then, but like the question is how this kind of knowledge is transferable to the very project that like the government in the New Zealand now is undergoing. So could you please respond to that question?
So the question about our interaction with the Wajiri people. So we are quite a long way through that process, and we are now building the telescope with their permission. The biggest single challenge was definitely one of understanding and communication. I think for all of us who work closely in various science fields, it is quite sometimes we don't always understand, for people who are nothing to do with science, what we actually do. So, for example, the Wajiri people and Indigenous Australians in general are used to doing these allure agreements with typically big mining organizations. And with big mines, for example, there is a yearly income from the selling of whatever the ore is that they're mining. And so the indigenous peoples get a yearly percentage of the profits for that. It took a long time for us to explain to the Wajiri people that in a science project in astronomy, we're not selling the data on a yearly basis to the astronomers. The data is collected by the telescope, and the astronomers can have access to it freely. So there's no regular income to the telescope that they can get a proportion of. There's no process like that. And I think they were quite amazed that it's not a commercial activity with a profit, that they can then have a percentage of. So I think, as I said, the communication and getting a real understanding of what it is we're actually putting forward, and I think that was one of the biggest single issues. And I think continuing that education in that direction, but also for us to understand more and more about why an area is of importance to the Wajiri. In a sense, it doesn't matter if they tell us it's an important area and we shouldn't go there. That's all it takes for us to not go there. But just at a sort of a philosophical level, it is very nice to understand the reasoning behind it. And it helps just with the general growth and culture there. So, I think, as I said earlier, I think expectations and understanding of each organization, each group's point of view is probably the biggest single issue that we had in getting started with that process. And just noting your other comment there, yes, I agree. I think that this is an ongoing interaction, and be happy to help with it in whatever way is useful. And yes, I'll send my PowerPoint presentation through to you this afternoon so that people can look at it and email me any other questions. Thanks.
All right. So, Dr. Dr. Sterling, could you please
Happy
Yes.
to, happy to proceed if that's okay. So in relation to Indigenous knowledges and kind of challenges there and kind of the relationship with the project and what's going on, one thing from the outset that I was always really clear about, especially going through the process of getting ethics approval, is that I'm not actually looking for any Indigenous knowledge stories. So I'm not, when I'm going out and when I'm interviewing and I'm speaking with Indigenous peoples, I'm not asking for or trying to get the knowledge that they have in relation to dark skies and those sorts of stories. If that had been kind of the goal or one of the goals of the project, the ethics application would have been a completely different sort of process. Especially here in New Zealand, I would go through both the university ethics and also very specifically through the Māori Ethics Committee as well. And while of course I did consult with our Māori Ethics Committee and passed both of them, but it would have been a very separate sort of story. There's been a lot of unscrupulous use of Indigenous peoples by academic communities. I mean, we all know that, into archaeology, anthropology, and we can go on. So not looking to find out about or collect those sorts of stories. What I'm more interested in is kind of the experience Indigenous peoples have had with the dark sky sites, with that process of certification, and kind of how, of course, to the extent they may discuss and say, oh, for instance, one of my interviewees that I told you about at the very end was like, I didn't know X, Y, and Z story, or I didn't know my language, and this has been a way for me to reconnect, but not actually looking to know what that knowledge is. That would be a very different sort of project. But nonetheless, what I would say is that Antonia and I were having a text message discussion recently around Indigenous data sovereignty and things like that. And I'm not an expert in Indigenous data sovereignty, but I think it's very applicable here in the sense that even though I'm not looking for these sacred stories and I'm not recording those, and even if I had permission to do that, that's not something that I'm interested in doing. But even without doing that, I'm still very conscious of the fact that one of the main things here is whether you're going through certification for a dark sky site, whether you're setting up observatory, whatever it is that you're doing when you're operating with Indigenous peoples, is that Indigenous peoples should have access to the information about themselves, the information that they share. I mean, that's at the crux of Indigenous data sovereignty. So one of the things that I'm seeking to do, even though, again, it's not any sacred or protected knowledge that I'm talking about, I will still let them know all the outputs of the research, where this will be at. They'll be credited as part of the process of it, because what I don't want to do with this project is contribute to or be part of the problem that academia has been before in relation to Indigenous peoples and research that involves Indigenous peoples. And I think the one fundamental thing is whatever project that you're running, and I think hopefully gels with what Ant said, our previous speaker, what he just said is that you involve Indigenous peoples at every step of the process. Before you even start planning, you're already involving Indigenous peoples, so they're part of the planning and the process, and that is as kind of as best practice there. There's a lot of frameworks and guidelines out there of how to do that. UNDRIP, I mean WHO, UN has other standards. UN Business and Human Rights, Model Charter, they all have standards out there that are available in relation to that. I haven't had necessarily any particular challenges in my research project in relation to Indigenous knowledge, but as I've said, that is because that's not my driver there. I mean, the ultimate aim is to help Indigenous peoples preserve those stories by helping to preserve dark skies themselves, so knowing what their experiences are around that. But it's for them to kind of manage those stories and share whatever they want to share, however little or however much, or perhaps not even at all. You know, that's their right, of course. Thank you.
Thank you,
So,
Dr. Sea and Dr. Siko.
Yeah, so the second question is for Ibu Mujisa, but actually like her questions is already been answered by Dr. Esterling, because like Ibu Mujisa asking about like actually like how your research in terms of protecting dark skies through the integration of indigenous knowledge and legal frameworks, how this experience of working with knowledge systems such as MORI serve as a model for the context, for other contexts.
Yeah, really happy to kind of speak to that. So one of the main aims of the project is, as I said, is to design model legislation for New Zealand for protection of dark skies that incorporates Mātauranga Māori knowledge. And in just for context here in New Zealand, the kind of the driver of that is, and thinking as a lawyer with kind of my lawyer's hat on, is that here in New Zealand we have constitutional obligations under Treaty of Waitangi to act in partnership with, to consult with Māori. And so in theory, all our legislation should be done in cooperation and in conjunction with Māori. I don't know if that's necessarily always the case. I'm not a domestic lawyer, but I know Treaty of Waitangi and our constitutional obligations require that partnership. So when I'm looking to design the legislation here, it's upholding our constitutional obligations, best practice, everything else. And the idea is that hopefully the project, the legislation can serve as a model that can be not directly transposed or transplanted into other jurisdictions, but it can at least be a model to set people on a path. So for instance, one of the reasons when I initially designed the project is I didn't want it to just be in New Zealand. I wanted also another country as a comparator. And so hence Australia, New Zealand kind of for me went hand in hand, because both are English-speaking countries. Indigenous populations in both countries are more likely to know English as their second language beside their first language. The systems, they're both common law countries, so very much kind of a shared sort of legal background. And so I thought, right, I want a comparator here, because when I'm designing this legislation, I don't want it just to be something for New Zealand, but how could it be used, as I said, for other jurisdictions? So just thinking about your situation in Indonesia, I mean, I know Indonesia the legal system would be very different, and the cultural context would be very different than from New Zealand. But hopefully the idea is that the fundamental principles that are included in the legislation around Mātauranga Māori knowledge, which would be things like cooperation, participation, consultation, consent, that those sorts of things are transferable to other sorts of contexts. That's at least the idea anyway. And interestingly, what I've found in my research that's not necessarily been via the interviews is that while I think it's dangerous to kind of essentialize and place all Indigenous peoples as a monolith and say all Indigenous peoples are the same, because obviously not all non-Indigenous peoples are the same. You can, however, I think, see that there are some similarities, and the similarities that I've seen in my research have been is that Indigenous peoples have similar goals about wanting to control their knowledge, rightly so, and their views of dark skies and heritage is very holistic, very different from kind of a Western view of heritage being tangible versus intangible. Earth, land, place-based heritage as opposed to space, near Earth environment. Those sorts of dichotomies don't really exist. And so also taking that into consideration when working through this legislation, again, with those similarities, hoping that they can be used as models, or at least to help other jurisdictions in relation to designing protections for dark skies. I hope that answers the question.
All right, so we have another more question. Pak Sarwo Ferdiwibowo Do you want to ask question? Please
Yeah,
unmute
sure.
yourself. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, moderator. And well, I think it's a very insightful presentation today because when we talk about space science, we also the first thing came to our mind is NASA and their rocket science. When we found something different like this, look the perspective from cultural the explanation of cultural perspective, I think it's very insightful and spark some idea in my spark some new idea in our mind. So, but still, I have a some question for Mr. Stikal and Mr. Sterling. For first question, share the same sky. The same sky is sound very beautiful actually, and but I think when we build modern facility in indigenous area, there is a problem. It's more like a class of the cosmology. There is a class of cosmology. Maybe we can say. I think I want to deep dive deeper in this term sharing. How the sharing is working here? Oh, where is it lead to be? Is it lead to the occupation of the knowledge? I mean here, modern knowledge will occupy the the indigenous knowledge or coexistent knowledge. If it's coexistent knowledge, how it works? And or maybe it's a hybrid knowledge. I need more explanation in this term, because you use negotiation term here. How this negotiation work? Now, so for Mr. Esterling, I also have found the beautiful word here, like when we admire rainbow color in the water, we know it's we admire the oil, the pollution. I mean, but in the third world country like Indonesia, I had to use this third world term, but I have to use it. Artificial light, I mean electric lamp, is a representation of modern civilization, and the modern people here nowadays have a desire to be a modern people. It's the biggest obstacle. My question is, I think it's a common question, but so the subtle apa ya, keresahan itu apa ya? Okay. Subtle concern from the people in Indonesia, maybe as a sample in Indonesia, is have the indigenous people to protect the dark sky. So the indigenous people live in dark forever. I think we have to ban the electricity for them. It's maybe a shallow question, but it's a, like I say, it's a so the subtle concern of the Indonesian people, from the people from the third world. I think that all from my question, and thank you for the answer.
So in terms of your question, yeah, one of the things I didn't really discuss was exactly that one of the indigenous populations' science views and astronomy knowledge, which is extensive, of course, because as we've seen all around the world, most indigenous groups have got some history of knowledge of the sky based on simple visual observations ranging from constellation names to seasons, etc., etc. And we have not engaged heavily in that at all with the SKA project on that aspect, but it is one that we have started to look at. Last year here in Australia, the International Astronomical Union, the IAU, held a meeting in Melbourne about Indigenous astronomy. And that was the beginning of more engagement about the Indigenous groups explaining to us their view of the astronomy world and the night sky. And we need to do a lot more of that. We really have barely barely scratched the surface of this topic. And certainly I'm very keen for us to get much more involved in that work.
Thank you very much for the question. That's extremely interesting about this idea of modernity, and as you say there in Indonesia, this idea that lighting and having that this is progress and being modern. I hadn't actually considered that before or run across that so far in my research, so that will be definitely something for me to follow up with. But one thing that I would stress here is that protecting dark skies, protecting the night sky, doesn't mean no lighting at all. It means smarter, better, more efficient lighting. It's not lack of lighting completely. I was actually struck in Antonia's presentation when she was talking about and she had the nice image there of the traditional house, and she said, look, you can have your fire, you can have everything kind of going on inside. The way its natural design is you're still living your life, but at the same time it's smart living. You're not impacting on dark skies. And what's really interesting, for instance, in some of the international dark sky places that I visited in Australia is that as part of this certification process, there will be things around, concerns by community members at the beginning of the process of going through certification was like, what you mean I can't have any light? I can't turn the lights on in my house? I can't do this? And it was like, no. And it was a lot of the process of getting certification was explaining it's about smarter, better, more efficient lighting. So in homes, in some of the sites, the requirement is of course you can turn your lights on in your house, but you have blackout curtains, or you have efficient ways to minimize the light that escapes from your house. For instance, with grocery stores, some of the grocery stores in the local communities in Australia were saying, we can't have any lighting whatsoever at any point in time. And they said, no, it's about having limited hours in which you have this lighting. And the local supermarket, was quite happy. They said, oh, okay, that makes sense. It's not a complete blackout from X time to X time it's off, but it's on at these other times. And the one thing that I would say that also relates to what you're saying about this lighting as well, is that another big challenge is that there's the perception that A, as I've just said, that it means no lighting whatsoever, but B, that light somehow means safety. And we know that that's not the case. Actually, with efficient and good lighting, and lighting that is both good for the environment, the night sky is also good for us. I'm not the scientist or the lighting engineer here, but being shown the models of how protected lighting, which shines down with a cover, if you have unprotected lighting, the human eye can't see anything around, whereas with protected lighting, it allows the human eye to adjust. So you're actually able to see if someone would be coming at you in a park or down the lane or whatever it is. But there's not any data that we have that you're more safe with unmitigated endless lighting, or less safe with this sort of protected lighting. So I think that's another kind of perception that we really have to work with when advocating for dark sky protection. It's not no light, it's better, more efficient, smarter lighting.
So the problem here is about the consumption between how actually everything when everything is put into what actually we just need, not just what we want, right? It's so that's a very indigenous perspective, just be humble and then just be modest with everything we can take advantage from the nature. And then so do we have another question? All right, yes, please unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me right now? Am I audible?
Yes.
Suaranya kecil, Mas.
Oh, oke. Oke, semoga sudah lebih kedengaran ya sekarang ya.
Now it's better.
Okay, thank you. So I have a follow-up question for Anthony regarding your efforts to to approach the Wajari people about modern astronomy or Western astronomy. So do they eventually have evolved somehow a few of the benefits of science development and also astronomy for their own community? And how does this have shaped their support for the observatory? And then also for Shea, what do you think of the other perception that dark sky is not really that important for modern society, and why they should care for the importance of dark skies for indigenous cultures? So how do you also try to bridge this perception to effectively create the needed laws to protect the night sky? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. If just make sure I've understood it. So in terms of the astronomy science, the Wajiri are keen to talk to us and explain to us about their view of the night sky and their traditional stories and how they link. There are a few individuals who are very interested in our science, and I'm hoping that they might progress through, a sort of an education system that would allow them to be an active astronomer using the telescope. That would be a wonderful outcome. We do have in Eastern Australia, there are a couple of Indigenous Australians who are active astronomers, and finally, we're actually looking to bring those individuals over here to Western Australia to meet some of the Wajiri, and because we're hoping they can act as a sort of a bit of an interpreter in terms of taking our very Western science approach to the astronomy and talking to the Wajiri about it in perhaps language they can understand more. This is something we're literally just starting on, so we're a long way to go on this, but it's something that's been under discussion for some time, and I'm hoping this year that we can actually make some progress in that area.
Thank you very much for your question, and it's an extremely good question. Essentially about advocacy. Why should we care about this? I suppose it depends on what Shay answers that question. Cynical Shay or positive Shay answering that question. I mean, this is something that I've spoken about with colleagues numerous times. And Tony and I have discussed this. We discussed this when we were at the UN at the Dark Sky Symposium there, about how not to be depressed about the future. I suppose if you want to have a motivator in terms of for people and why should they care, kind of the cynical side of things is you have to show them that there's an interest, that there's like some sort of self-interest there. So talking about things like economy, more efficiency, better lighting, saving money, things with safety, improving safety outcomes, and to a certain extent for some people as a driver, environmental health, which I think is probably why a lot of the focus has been on environmental and human health, particularly human health, of saying if we don't have this, it's actually damaging for us. But of course, we can see with climate change that even arguments in relation to climate change that we're destroying ourselves, that obviously is not stopped climate change. But some sort of kind of self-interest there. I know that sounds quite cynical, but the one thing that I'm quite positive about is that in the interviews that I've done, a lot of it seems to be lack of knowledge. And once people kind of understand dark skies, why dark skies are important, not just for people, but environment and just in and of themselves, for the sake of themselves, Indigenous viewpoints in relation to that. People seem to have, there seems to be kind of some sort of change or an understanding there. As I said, in all the communities that I've looked at so far, after a place has actually become certified as a dark sky site, It's reported better interactions between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, understanding of why dark skies are important. And so I think it's kind of lack of knowledge around things. So making people aware of these things. Now, I don't think that that's easy. I think that there's a long and hard road to go. I can't only speak from my personal experience, but most recently speaking at UNUSA, when Antonio and I were there back in December, I found it very challenging to speak with some of the people in industry. Of course, not everyone, but some people in industry. I found it very hard to communicate with and to share knowledge with. There was very much, I noticed amongst some of you, that everyone's a consumer. And my point was, they're saying, oh, well, look, we're giving free internet service to these really rural communities, and we have our customer, like our code of conduct towards customers and best practice and how we should behave with customers. And my question was to industry, I was like, what about people who don't want to be customers? What about, or what about you're not a customer at all, or communities that don't want involvement, they don't want faster, better, newer internet 2.0 or whatever it is that you're selling or that you're offering. And there's kind of I think a bit of a, I don't know, at least my experience is for some people that was I can't contemplate what you're saying, that someone's not a consumer. I can't contemplate that you wouldn't want A, B, C, and D of the newest thing. So I do think it will be a challenge, and for me that was very eye-opening, because I'm operating normally in an academic context, whether that be teaching students, whether that be with other legal academic colleagues, and now increasingly I have reverse science communication is what somebody said to me the other day that I'm doing. So talking with scientists about these other aspects of what they're researching, of what astronomers are researching, and so I'm used to kind of dealing a bit more in academic sort of circles. So I did find the experience at UNUSA and at the UN quite eye-opening. So I do, but with that said, organizations like UNUSA at the UN bringing industry and academia and policy and people together, I think that's so vital and that's so important. But I think there's a long way to go. I know Antonia and I have discussed this many times before, and of course I'm not speaking for her experience at the UN, but that was at least my experience. So yeah, thank you.
All right, so do we have another question?
Dr. Hera, can I have another response for Ferdi's question?
Yes, I think
Yeah.
like you're supposed to respond to all of those questions
Yeah.
as well.
Okay, so yeah, let me share this article. Okay. Can you see this article?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So to answer Mas Ferdi's question about shared sky, I would like to show this article. So this article is titled "A Cultural Comparison of the Dark Constellations in the Milky Way." In Galaksi Bima Sakti, we call Milky Way is Galaksi Bima Sakti in Bahasa Indonesia, and then in that Galaksi Bima Sakti there is a dark constellation. Hold on. There is a dark part of that constellation here. Okay, and then related to the shared sky statement, it is not always clash of civilization, Mas Ferdi, because this article talks about the similarity of how some indigenous peoples around the world see or perceive this dark area of the Milky Way. I think I can share this article with you after this webinar. So here there are some indigenous perspectives mentioned, like the Inca from South America, and then the Mokovi from Argentina, and of course from Australia and other indigenous people. So basically, in general, this article talks about the similarity of how some indigenous people from different parts of the world see or perceive the dark areas of the Milky Way. That's the first answer. And then the second answer about shared skies, it's not really about the exact meaning of the sky that we should share with other group of indigenous people, or we should force them to follow us. It's not that, but we should share the need of the sky for the indigenous people. For example, like the people around Timau, they believe on Wisneno and Wispa, the god of the sky and the god of the earth. But the people in Bawaka country believe that their souls migrate to the sky country after they pass away. They are different in the relation, in the form of the relationship. It's different, but they share the similarity in the meaning of the sky for the local people. So I think the meaning of sharing the sky, we have to enlarge the meaning of sharing the sky, not just related to the same or similar culture, although it exists in some parts, but in the bigger part, we share the Western. We agree that the indigenous peoples have the relationship with the sky. That's it. I think that's the question from Mas Ferdi, and the question from Dr. Mujiza here. Ibu Mujiza, from what I have experienced in other countries, they engage the local knowledge or local tradition to the policy, like what is mentioned by Dr. Esterling before. New Zealand has particular holiday related to the sky, which is, I forgot the name, sorry. But at first it was not the holiday. It was not public holiday, but the Maori community was succeeded in enforcing the importance of the sky to the federal government of the New Zealand. So the government agreed to make that holiday or that festival as the national holiday. And then in Indonesia, I think I can take example from what happened in our country every year before Ramadan, like this year. And it was mentioned by Dr. Heri in his opening remark that we see the hilal or the crescent moon to define the beginning of the Ramadan. So I think from this experience, we know that the traditional knowledge is included in our national policy. Although there are some debates on that, I think it doesn't matter, because the point here, we acknowledge the local or traditional knowledge in our national policy. But for the protecting the dark sky, yes, I have to say that I was pessimistic at first. And then last year in the UN, I talked with Shay, and then she encouraged me that what we did here is not useless, but we still have the hope, because even if it is difficult to struggle with the government and things like that, it doesn't mean that we have to stop in protecting the indigenous knowledge people, because like Dr. Harry said, the indigenous people is the knowledge holder of the knowledge that we use until now. Okay, so yeah, I think that's all my response. Thank you.
That's a very interesting point. This is not about like class cosmology, but this is about shared cosmology.
And here you, Hera, would you like to close your microphone? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Great. So because we don't have other questions. So Dr. Esterling is not here, so she said like she's going to be muted for like 5 minutes. But like, okay, since we have no other questions, and I also think I don't need to make a conclusion or summary of our webinar today, but like only one word that like actually we have a same thought about the what's actually the very challenge about such issue between, you know, like we are trying to bridge between what actually the very for the very common benefit not just for like indigenous people but also like for people in general. So with the hope that like with the project that has been done by like Dr. Not has been done, what has been doing by Dr. Sinkel and Dr. Esterling for the particular communities there in West Australia and in Africa, and then also New Zealand and to Maori people, that can somehow become a model for like other benefit for other indigenous people in different areas or like different countries. And then also Antonia's make a very good point there, like it's not just about the class cosmology, but like what actually we need to make an agreement is we need all together to protect the sky for our benefit together. No matter like what the different language is. So I think that's all I can say. So this is very interesting topics. I would like to hear more about this for our next webinar, hopefully. Thank you so much for BRIN to host the webinar, and thank you for the speakers for your very, very impressive talks and insightful. So yeah, I hope to see you all again. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, goodbye,
Yeah.
everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye. Thank you.
Mbak Hera, makasih banyak ya Mbak Hera ya.